Hi, folks. Thanks, everybody, for being here. We will get started in just a moment. We are expecting a couple more people, at the very least, some more of the people who sent us inputs, like Luke. In the meantime, I will start the administrivia question by asking if there's anybody who's willing to take notes. We really do need a note taker. Remember, this is not a he said, she said style note taking. It's just record any decisions that get made. So in this case, we'll probably have the decision on which style of GitHub, Slack, yes or no, and recording which technical questions to tackle and the incoming personal drafts. So shouldn't be onerous notes, just 7 or 8 lines, but we really do need somebody to do that.
Hey Ted, I only have a stab at taking notes when I'm not opening my mouth.
Okay, thank you, James. If anybody can help James out, James, will you be using the note-taking tool here or not?
Yes, I'll use the notes, the post thingy.
Okay, if you want to help James out, just jump into the notes thing, and the various note takers can help each other. Thanks very much.
James is Cullen here. I will try and help as well, but I'm having spotty internet connection, so I can't be the prime person. Thanks.
Okay, so the next thing is to remind you, this is our very first working group meeting as the Media Over a Quick working group as opposed to a BOF. And so it's a time to remind you of the note well. There are various IETF IETF policies, which it calls to your attention, the set of BCPs being at the bottom. So you are, in fact, expected to follow the anti-harassment procedures, the code of conduct, and to be aware of both our copyright and our patent policies as part of the IETF. If you have any questions about those, please understand that once you start participating, we will expect you to follow them. So you can be watching if you're a little bit confused or need to go talk to a lawyer, but please don't contribute unless you agree to these. If you do agree to them, please contribute as much as you'd like. And that brings us back to the second bit of administrivia, which is there anybody who needs to bash the agenda? Okay, hearing no agenda bashes and seeing nobody in the queue, we will go on to our logistics questions. The first of those is around GitHub. So as people remember from the mailing list discussion, RFC 8874 discusses a couple of different modes in which a working group can operate. So some of them are issue tracking mode, and another is issue discussion mode. And I guess the biggest question for the working group at this point is, do we want to use it at all? And presuming that we do, which of the modes? Are we simply storing the documents there? Are we using the issue tracker there to raise issues, but discussing them on the mailing list? Or do we want to have some of the issue discussion in the tracker? The difference between having some of the issue discussion in the tracker and having it on the mailing list is primarily how early the mailing list gets involved in the decision making. The mailing list is always the place where the current version of a document is approved. So the mailing list always has the last word, so to speak, on any decision, including the one that we'll make in the discussion today. But the floor is open for people to express their preferences, and hopefully we can come to a consensus. And it looks like Spencer is first.
GitHub, please. And I am comfortable with raising issues in GitHub and discussing issues that seem to be being discussed in GitHub on the mailing list. The one thing that I would say, in addition to what Ted was saying, was that I'm expecting that the repository activity for any of the repositories that are involved here are being reflected to the mailing list weekly. So it's not like the people in GitHub are invisible. You're just not getting notification PR comment by PR comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Spencer. Victor?
I think we should be using GitHub with issue tracking in GitHub. That has been a fairly successful approach in both Quick and WebTrans working groups. So I don't see the reason to not do that.
Thank you, Spencer. I still see you in queue. Did you have another comment to make?
I'm just not good at lowering my hands. I will leave now.
Okay, I see a comment from Kirill in the chat saying no mailing list, please. That's actually not one of the options, as Alan points out. The mailing list is definitive per IETF process. The option here is to have the mailing list be the place that confirms decisions that are taken other places, but it always has to be part of the process, so it can't be taken out of the process as things stand now. Are there any other questions or comments on this before we start to try and draw conclusions? Okay, that's a little bit less discussion on this than I was expecting, but maybe everybody just agreed with everything that Alan and Spencer and Victor said. So the upshot of what I hear is there's nobody who is advocating for working without GitHub, and that both of the people who spoke positively were doing it in the mode where issue tracking is done primarily in GitHub issues. I think what that means is what we will take back to the list, just to remind folks that that's how we get a confirmation, is that the sense of the room in this meeting was that we would use the GitHub style where issue tracking was done primarily in the GitHub repos. Everything will, of course, come back to the list as is required by IETF process. Does anybody think that's the wrong conclusion to draw from the discussion so far? Okay, note takers, please put that down as the discussion to be confirmed on the list. The next piece of logistics is the question of Slack, yes or no. So I'll point out two things before we get this discussed. One, there is no IETF document that documents how to use Slack, so it's very much an ad hoc process by any individual working group. I think the working group that uses it most extensively is Quick with the Quick Dev Slack. And I'll point out there that the Quick Dev Slack has one serious issue for some members of that working group, which is the default Slack client, the unpaid version of it, only keeps a certain amount of history. So you pretty much either have to pay for it or be aware that the history is always incomplete. So the question to this group is Slack, yes or no? And the floor is open. Victor?
Just we once again follow what the quick working group did, which is Slack, yes, for interop and implementation discussion, but generally no for design decisions. And it's not just because the free version of Slack is not archived, but even if it is, Slack is inherently hard to search things inside of. So if we're going to have a serious design discussion, it should be somewhere that is trivially searchable and linkable.
Thank you. Cullen?
So there's many ways we could solve this, but I don't think we should have, I mean, I'm all for using Slack or a tool. I don't really like Slack, but some tool like that would be fine. I think we should use a tool like that. However, I don't think we should use any tool where 100% of it does not end up in a long-term publicly searchable archive that IETF can use, because that's critical for our legal process. I'd strongly object to things other than that. So that might happen just due to, you know, being mirrored onto an email list or something like that, like the same way we do with the PRs or with the GitHub stuff. But I think one way or another, there needs to be a long-term public archive of this stuff, because it turns out to be really important later when there's a patent argument and somebody patents something that the working group did. And the working group wants to show, no, we did that before you patented it. So I think it's critical that 100% of it is public, it is archived somewhere.
Spencer?
Queue before I start talking. So I asked this, I think I was the one that asked this question, and I agree with what's been said so far. The one thing that I would add at this point is I'm having the impression that we're planning to do more with Zulip in the future than we are with Slack as an IETF. So we might just want to keep an eye on whether that's a better answer than Slack the free version of Slack as it's used today. Thank you.
Suhas?
Most of the comments here, and I would like to kind of qualify that question saying, can we use Slack for like what Victor said, interop and implementation, like clarification discussions, but not design discussions and outcome for how the working group decides what to do next. It's very easy to kind of get into a mode where as part of the discussion, we are all enthusiastic and we'll start these design discussions there. We need to somehow make sure that it's some reflected or, you know, archived so that it can be searchable at some point.
Alan?
Okay. Yeah. So chair off for a second. I just want to say that I second a lot of the comments about having for interop and the sort of like technical real-time discussion for Quick and other groups has been super useful. So I think having a channel like that is important. I also want to just bring to folks' attention that inside the Quick Dev Slack, there is an MOQ channel now where there is some coordination happening between the authors of individual drafts. So there is some informal discussion happening there, and it was sort of just a placeholder because people needed a place to coordinate. But I wanted to make people aware that that was something that was going on now, and we're not trying to like necessarily hide any of that discussion from other people.
Are there any other folks who would like to step up to the queue to discuss this point? Spencer?
I was just going to ask Alan if you could send a pointer to the current, wherever you think the actual place starting Monday morning would be for that to the mailing list. Thank you.
Can I just clarify, Spencer, what you're asking? Are you saying if we don't make any other decision in the next 75 minutes, that we're going to, that I would send a pointer to where it is now happening, or something else.
I know that you and Ted will do the right thing. I think what I was mostly saying was that I did not realize that such a thing was in place. So if the answer is we should move it somewhere else, to its own place or whatever, I know you all will do the right thing. I just don't know where to look now. Thank you.
Yeah, understood. I think that the draft authors sort of said, because they work at different companies and we're trying to iterate rapidly on updates to their drafts prior to the draft deadline, we're like, we need a communication channel. And so one was created, and it's, but it's certainly public, but not maybe easily discoverable. So I'll just post a link, maybe even the minutes of this meeting. So if anybody wants to go and see what's being discussed there, it's obviously available, or join in that discussion. But I'm also hoping that maybe out of this meeting, we'll have a place where we can actually, a more formal place where such things can happen.
Yeah, and that sounds perfect. And repeating, I know that you and Ted will do the right thing.
Well, the first thing we're going to do is to see if I can confirm a read of what we have there. It seems like everybody agrees that if we use a channel like this, it will not be used for any design decisions. It would be used during interop discussions and by editors or implementers for quick confirmations of their understanding of what the spec currently says. So I think I didn't hear anybody argue for using Slack for anything that would affect the design of the protocol, or that would affect the long-term specification. That would all be in GitHub or on the mailing list. I also heard pretty strongly concerns about the disappearing nature of Slack in particular. I believe that Cullen, Ali, and myself all mentioned that. So I believe that possibly we're not looking at Slack itself. So what I propose to do here is to say, look, if a design team wants to use a channel, then it's not formally part of the working group. That's cool. What we'll do is go off and see if we can find either a mechanism to reflect all the Slack messages into an archival medium, like a secondary mailing list or something like that, or a digest that can be posted to the mailing list. Or we'll investigate using Zulip, which is the new IETF replacement for Jabber, and which does have this long-term archival property, and does allow us to create multiple channels within a particular Zulip topic, like MOQ. So I think what that means is the Slack answer isn't yes or no so much as it is not right now. And we'll work on seeing if we can find one that meets the archival properties relatively quickly, but that the understanding is even when it's in place, it's for informal communications, but those informal communications would be retained. Cullen is in queue. Cullen?
Let's see, I guess audio seems to be going now. That doesn't seem sort of okay, but I think you should probably, I think it'd be good to take get some input up from the room on Zulip. I know I definitely would not want to use Zulip at all. I just find it very difficult to use. I think there's, Discord or Slack would be fine. So and maybe I'm alone in that, but I think we could get some input on that very quickly. And I will note that every group that I have said say they will not do design decisions on whatever that tool is promptly goes off and does tons of their design decisions on that. So I think we need to be a little bit more. I mean, I know that we always pay lip service, like it's just like saying we're going to confirm it on the list, but I think that actually we need to be sort of realistic that design decisions will happen on this stuff. I'm not trying to change people's take on that. I'm just noting that it happens and that we should keep that in mind when selecting a tool.
Oh, okay, and I think that reinforces the need for the archival record of it, even if we think it's going to be informal, just in case it becomes a place for some critical piece of data that affects a design decision gets hashed out. Alan?
Yeah, I just want to observe maybe what I've seen, for Quick, which used the Slack for many years, which is that I'm sure as people interop and discover problems, they're also discussing possible design solutions to those problems in the real-time channel. But I think for the most part, those would always be reflected then into issues in GitHub with discussion happening there afterwards. And I don't think by any means that like Slack became the last word. So I sort of expect that the same process, and as Spencer would say, people will do the right thing here. But I'm not arguing against that, having a long-term archival and searchable history is also important. So.
Sorry, does anybody want to talk to the point about Zulip that Cullen raised? Spencer?
I think I do, but could you state the point that Cullen raised that you're asking for input on?
Sure. Cullen said that he was concerned about us saying that we would look either at how to take things out of Slack so that they were archived, or we would look in Zulip, since it seems to be the IETF replacement for Jabber. And his comment was that he felt it would be wise for us to kind of poll the room on usage of Zulip, because he felt like he did not currently himself use it and wasn't particularly keen on doing so. So I think that's a question here. He mentioned Discord as well as another option. So we can go and look and say, we could go and set up a Discord for this. It has the same sort of disappearing properties for some people, but we have to be a little bit aware of the setup of too many tools. If people are using Slack for Quick and Discord for MOQ and Zulip for HTTP BIS, we're kind of all over the map there, and that's a bit hard to track.
Okay, yeah, okay. So surprise, working groups can do the right thing also. So whatever the right thing to do is. The one suggestion I would make about that is I don't have a huge amount of experience with Zulip. I've mostly used it during MeetEcho meetings, which we haven't had many of in a couple of months. So also, that might be an invitation for people to go take a look at Zulip and see what they think about that. Also, a reasonable thing to do would be to ask the tools team if our understanding of the direction with Zulip matches their understanding. If I remember correctly, we had test with Zulip and some other similar mechanism that they picked Zulip over the other mechanism. So it's like, I think they have a direction, but just for us to make sure that we know what it is and that they haven't changed it. Thank you.
Okay, I believe that the Zulip is the direction. We can confirm that it hasn't been changed, and I'll take the action item to do that. In the meantime, may I ask somebody to take the action item to see if they can find a mechanism that would allow us to create a digest or digested archive of a Slack channel. And if we can identify one of those, then the major objection to using Slack, which is that it's a disappearing medium for the free client, would go away. is there anybody who feels that they have the right skill set and the time to do that? So I'm going to take the fact that nobody's interested in doing that as part of the indicator on how anxious you are to have Slack as a tool. So if you're anxious to have Slack as a tool and don't feel like putting up your hand, that might be something you want to think about. Okay, not seeing any volunteers for this. The chairs will take the action item to reconfirm the direction on Zulip and ask around about Slack, but we'll take into account the fact that this seemed to be significantly lower priority than the GitHub discussion and go from there. Any other comments on this point before we move to our next item on the agenda, which is the use case document? Okay, hearing nothing, we will move on to the use case document. I believe, James, you said you would want us to share from our side from the preloaded slides, or did you want to do that?
Spend drive me.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you very well. There was some interference.
I was asking Spencer if he wanted to do the driving of the slides.
Okay, they should be preloaded, Spencer, if you wanted to click the share preloaded slides, or I can do that.
It is because, you know, so I have the meeting materials, and then I have the, okay. Okay, I'm in the right place. I'm not quite sure where the button is for that.
I believe it should be next to the join queue button.
I got a slide share. Is that just a request to you all?
Yeah, it will give a request and we'll say yes.
Okay. And it seems like I should be getting another button when you say that, when you say yes.
I haven't actually seen the request yet. Alan, did you see it?
No.
All right, just to save time then, I will, oh, no, it looks like it's being shared.
Fabulous. So I'm just waiting for that to refresh someplace. Yeah, there. Okay.
Have you got what you need?
I've got a new deck is being shared, and I don't think anything else popping up. Okay, there we go.
Okay,
Sorry,
I think I might actually have to advance this then because it looks like it did it from mine, but that's okay. Just tell me when you want it advanced.
Okay, thank you. So I think James and I are both talking. So we're here talking about a individual draft that we had worked on. pre-charter, and just basically what to do next with that, as you all put on the agenda. That sounds like a next slide, maybe. So the working group is chartered to adopt a use cases and requirements document. The draft we've been working on is a potential candidate. James and I think this draft would be a useful starting place for MOQ, but recognizing that the author's pre-BOF opinions are what's in the draft now, not what's in the approved charter. So we are proposing that we revise this draft to reflect the actual charter, not asking the working group to consider adoption now. And you all should see the revised draft before anyone asks a question about adoption. Does that make sense to people? I can stop for questions. We can stop for questions. Hearing no questions, could we go to slide 3? So we had started on use cases. We thought that use cases would drive requirements, which would drive work on protocols. The charter includes, but is not limited to, these use cases, quoting live streaming, gaming, and media conferencing. Section 4 of the individual draft describes these 3 use cases. And so we had 3 questions that we were hoping to get guidance from the working group, the chartered working group, about whether there were other use cases that are in scope for MOQ that have unique requirements that would not be covered under live streaming, gaming, and media conferencing. I think it's, Ted, does it seem reasonable for us to stop after every question and let people talk?
Yeah, you can ask.
Okay, so are there other use cases that are in scope for MOQ that have unique requirements that would not be covered by the use cases that are listed in the charter?
So you can always ask this question again once you've written the.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the other thing is, I don't know how much time people spent looking at, well, 2 things, let me say. A lot of the work on this was done before the draft was done before the first non-working group forming BOF on MOQ. And so anybody who's been paying attention since then may not be familiar with the draft, and I don't know how much time people have spent looking at the slides before the meeting. So I can definitely ask these questions on the mailing list. One other question that James and I had wondered about was whether the hybrid use case that's described in section 4.2 of the draft. And so this is, to be clear, this is a use case that has aspects of both live streaming and highly interactive gaming, media conferencing kind of requirements.
And the example that has been cited on quite a few occasions is the staff all hands meeting, where there may be hundreds or even thousands of viewers, but only a small number of active people being interactive, both producing, sending media as well as receiving it, whereas, you know, the vast majority are purely just receiving and consuming media.
Thank you, James. Suhas.
Thanks, Spencer, for bringing this. I think some of the discussions with the unified work that we're also trying to do has this aspect of how do we let viewers, like Luke would also talking about it more, but it's more about how do we let users say or viewers say the latency they would expect, and having the delivery protocol meet that requirement would enable some of these use cases where you're in just a live stream listening mode, and then you want to jump into interactive mode like esports, betting, or in the staff meeting use case that James provided. I think this some at some point we a requirement to that would be there, which might be related to how do you express the latency or something like that, but I don't know exactly what it means at this point in time.
Thank you, Suhas. I can make a my opinion statement, which is that IETF work often is not super focused on use cases as a starting point. So we might be adding some material in the use case portion of the draft, but I think the intention right now is to have the same document with use cases and requirements, so that it may be that what you're talking about as we drill down on requirements would be more naturally part of that section. Other comments?
I agree on that.
Thank you. The other question, and this may be getting into discussion that would happen after we're moving forward with this draft, if it's okay if the working group moves forward with it, is making sure that we have enough descriptive material in the use case section to explain why we have certain requirements. And as Suhas was saying, there's certain certain use cases with that would say this is because we support this aspect of this kind of use case, this is why this is a requirement. So that may be the answer to our third question there. So I think any more comments on this slide? And if there are not, could we go to the next slide? I think we've had the discussion, so there is one more slide. What James and I are planning to do, assuming we make it this far, is to update the abstract and introduction to reflect the approved charter. There's quite a bit of history, observations, and our opinions throughout the draft that can be removed. That updating the use cases to reflect working group discussion on slide 3 questions would be the other thing that we would want to do before we ask anybody for adoption of this draft by the working group. And then proposing an initial structure of the requirements section based on implicit requirements that are in the approved charter. And at this point, if this rolls the way I was thinking it might, the working group would be controlling both the use cases and requirements for MOQ at that point. Any comments or questions on this? Cullen?
Hey, Spencer. I think, yeah, I think it's totally the right path. I mean, if you wanted to adopt this right now, I'd be like, oh, there's some parts of it I don't like, but I think you're on the right path. And the other thing that I might suggest you do, if there's parts, delete as much, like there's a lot of history in there. Let's give the condense it, make it easy for everyone to read. But also, if there's stuff that's just not agreed upon on the working group, but there's a range of opinions, we can express that and then adopt it as a working group document with the issue not resolved, but an issue, we have a range of options. We could go here. There isn't yet working group agreement. We can have things in the draft that aren't working group agreement if they're clearly identified that way. And that can get us moving on this whole thing. But anyway, thank you guys.
Yeah. So I think that there are things in the draft that are not in scope, but I've not done a I've not done a pass in the last 20 minutes for what's in there that is not agreed upon, not obviously agreed upon, but that is in, that the answers would be in scope. So that helps me. That's a very helpful comment to me, Colin. Thank you. Suhat?
Yeah, I think this is a useful document to have, and it'll help us drive the protocol design and architecture as we go forward. And I agree. Once the authors are ready with the next revision, we should consider it for adoption. Thank you for the work.
Oh, thank you. Suhas, I think you have my same skill at not leaving the queue. Don't learn from me, man. James, did you have anything that you wanted to say?
I think there's one point of clarification that is probably worth mentioning, which is that upon adopting our draft after we address the various points that we've listed out, doesn't necessarily mean that the working group initially agrees with everything that's put in there. However, once it's brought into the working group as adopted, then everybody who participates in the working group can then use the consensus mechanisms to then get some of those things fixed, particularly if they're somewhat controversial. So I would warmly like to for folk to keep that in mind, that there can be definitely disagreeable points in here, and that by bringing the document in, we can then argue about it and then get a consensus over it. And this ploy has been done by other working groups. It just so happens that my own other active document is being done in this way, and it seems to work.
Yeah, and what James said is reminding me, at least my understanding of what it means to adopt this is that the working group thinks that this is a document that is a reasonable basis for working group work. So, any other comments? I'm gonna have a question for the chairs and the working group, of course.
Okay, Spencer, thank you very much. You said you had a question for the chairs. What would that be?
Yeah, I was not really thinking about when we did the first version of the slides for this talk. I was not really thinking about adoption now, and as the slides reflect. But I'm wondering, if Cullen said, he'd be okay with adopting it now, with this work plan as part of that. And would other people be okay with that?
So with Chair Haddon, since that wasn't one of the decisions we announced would be part of the interim, I would prefer not to do that at this interim. If you guys produce the document with the revisions, we can take that up in London for IETF 115. But I'm a little bit uncomfortable with doing it at this interim. We could do it on the list as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Much better. Thank you.
But probably not right now, especially given
Yeah,
other topics.
that makes perfect sense.
In either case, the call for adoption has to go to the list.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
but just even the discussion, right, Ted?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I get that. Cool. Cullen?
Maybe I just came across the wrong way. I mean, I do think you guys should do an update of the document to try and make it be something that reflects the working group consensus, either by being something we all agree on or being like clearly documenting it's not working group consensus for the parts that aren't in the doc before we adopt it for working group consensus. But I felt bad for you presenting and getting zero feedback, and it's like, do people love this, hate it? Like, I think you're on the right track. Please do the work. Thank you. Like, that's what I was really trying to say.
Thank you for clarifying as well. So, like I said, what you just said is kind of what I was thinking we were going to be doing between now and London. So the ID cutoff is like Monday, right?
Yes.
So it is not super likely that we would produce and submit a draft by Monday that does that. The one thing that I also wanted to follow up with what Cullen was saying was there are things that we might or might not take out of the draft, but the things that are not part of the working group charter, those are the things that definitely need to go. And then, then once everything we're talking about is under the current charter, I think that would be a fine time for us to talk about the working group adopting this. So, do you want me to send the request for a slot in London now?
Sure. We'll consider a request for a slot in London based on the minutes of this meeting. So
perfect. You are a sport. Thank you. I think that's everything that I know. Back to the rest of the meeting.
Okay. The next was the question of which technical questions to tackle in London, and Suhas, you had a presentation on that.
Yes. Ted, can you drive? Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Or not? Okay, great. So the main idea behind this slide deck is not going deep into how do we solve each of the things that's been listed in the slide, but basically looking at the charter and distilling it one level down to see what kind of questions that we would like to answer. It might turn into requirements that would help, like Spencer's and James' document, or it might turn into a task list that the working group would want to follow. So keeping that context in the mind, I'll jump to the next slide, please. Okay, topics that we'll be talking about here, which is basically grokked from the charter. We need to work on a common published protocol between ingest and distribution, and we need a way to name or address things, whatever we call it as, to identify things, and so that we can request them appropriately. And also we need a way to kind of package this media. We have different formats there, like how do we want to package this media, and how does the end-to-end security fits in the overall picture. Next slide, please. On the publishing side of the picture, like what does a common publish protocol require? It needs to be common between the contribution and distribution side of the picture, and we need a way to support to specify different kinds of media types, like it's an ad, audio, video, or subtitles, or it's an ad or something, and also different qualities those media types correspond to, and also different codecs. Those are some of the things at least we need to be able to kind of specify as part of the protocol and on the things that's being published. And these things need to be we need to be able to identify them uniquely, so that on the consumer side, you should be able to kind of retrieve that. And also, when you're publishing, the media can be published at various granularity. For example, if you talk about the video, video can be published as individual frames that comes out of the encoder, or it could be group of frames, like the group of pictures that we usually do see in the video encoding, or something different. We need to kind of, as a group, decide on what's the right way to go about it, and some of these things will also be addressed when Luke presents about the unified draft. But here I'm putting it here so that we need to address this technical detail. Next slide, please. And once the media is being published on over the transport, in order to make a relays the first-class citizens in the architecture, we need to have some kind of metadata that goes along with the media being published, that helps the relays or the caches or the proxies to make the right caching decisions, like either you want to drop or forward, and how to do it under congestion, especially in a media agnostic way. We don't want the relays or proxies to be worried about every codec that comes out in the future, or every codec that's been built in the past. So a media agnostic way to kind of provide metadata that can be read by the relays, having some information about the identification of the media being published, the priority, some dependencies if it's there, and also should we cache it or not, helping these kind of relays or the middle boxes make decisions without having to look into the actual media payload, which will be encrypted. And also, the protocol should enable to configure to support various use cases that James just mentioned about live streaming or interactive media or media conferencing. We need to be able to kind of specify that in the protocol, and whatever we send should be able to map on the quick stream or quick streams or quick datagrams. Datagrams is something we are evaluating, but we for the use case, especially the media conferencing or the interactive use cases. But something the protocol should provide a way to map. And also the other things is that how do we send this data or web transport or HTTP3 or raw quick. That's some of the things that we need to consider when designing this protocol. And application data can be end-to-end encrypted, in the sense that from the publisher to consumer, if there's no transcoding or anything happening in between, how if we support something like that, how even how the keying happens, everything is outside the scope of this protocol. But we need to kind of make sure that the data in transit is not or cannot be read by the middle boxes. Next slide, please. That kind of covers, what on the publication side of things to happen. Okay, one of the important things also that goes along with either publication that's also common to the consumption is how do we name or identify the things that's being published. Given we are working in the web model with CDNs and kind of relays and also the origin in the picture, we need to make sure that what are being published is in the scope of an application domain or the origin, and that basically means that somehow it's tied to a billing relationship that happens with a company that's kind of actually producing the media. It might not be a direct goal of this protocol, but this architecture works that way. We need to kind of keep that in mind. And what naming basically does is identifies these elemental streams or the variations of those things. So that way, it's very easy for the consumer to kind of request the right quality, or the consumer to kind of consumers to kind of pick between different qualities. For the fan out scenarios from the CDN and to multiple subscribers, we are talking about like millions or like hundreds of thousands of subscribers. We need to be able to kind of the name should enable the consumers to kind of ask for the data they need that matches a given name. Next slide, please. On packaging media, while we're transporting, there are multiple options that we want to package media. Some of the contenders that we have, or some of the options that we can that coexist, or something like using existing container format like CMAF. And also supporting ROC container format if for the cases where if we think if CMAF does not help there, supporting a ROC container format. And as a group, we need to decide, do we need any other container formats that would help make the adoption of MOQ protocols widely. Next slide. Next, moving on to consumption side. So once we kind of design on how the names should be, on what being published and what they identify, the different qualities and the things, the consumer should be able to kind of ask those names, and also consumers should be able to kind of ask the right things based on the names, based on the names. Like each name should identify what kind of media it's being is being sent, and also the quality and the properties of that media, so that the consumer should be allowed to kind of ask those kind of things, and also stop if he's no longer interested. And again, since we're working in this web origin model, so the consumers are always authorized as the origin. It goes without saying that. Next slide, please. And on also on the requirements of what relays and caches should do, the basic functionality is to kind of, they should allow caching and distribution of the media data as applicable, and also they basically store data based on the trust that's been set up by the origin. Again, this goes without saying that. And also like how the publisher and consumer kind of work on quick streams or quick datagrams or whatever we decide the protocol should be, the relays should also be doing that. And for cases where the latencies need to be really kept low, some of the options like pipelining might be considered, where the less time is spent on the chain of relays, so that end-to-end latency can be reduced. But these are some of the things we need to explore as we design the protocol. And relays should be able to kind of make their cache or drop decisions just based on the metadata, and nothing and not being able to access the actual payload, the MOQ payload. So the relay should be able to kind of push the data based on the consumers asking for the data, push the data whenever it's available to fan out to any number of consumers. Next slide, please. On end-to-end security, the publication protocol itself would not be kind of is out of scope of the protocol to say how the keys for the encryption would happen, but we need to kind of consider possible options that would happen to support the use cases that we have listed. Is something like a DRM based like the content can be DRM encrypted to support many of the use cases on the live stream side of things. Or if you're going with like media conferencing use case, something like an MLS or some combination of S-frame might be one thing that we might consider. Or if people think there's something different that should be good to let good mechanism or the useful mechanism that could be used to derive the keys for encrypting the content, something like that. We need to kind of talk about that as well. I think that should be all. This kind of a laundry list of things that we might want to do, and I would like to kind of encourage working group to kind of think through these questions. Either we create a list somewhere where we can go discuss further, and kind of see how can we build our solution that kind of fits the requirements that we have.
Thanks, Suhas. So we have a few minutes to discuss here, and I think that what might be interesting is to try to surface the topics that we think we could put on an agenda in London to have like a deeper discussion. There's obviously a lot of topics that we have to cover in this working group over time, but think about what are the first ones that we want to really dig into that will maybe have more downstream implications. So with that in mind, people want to jump in and weigh in on what Suhas said or other related topics. And first in queue is Spencer.
One of the one of the things I was going to suggest that we focus on early is getting a clear specification of what we think a protocol stack looks like. This was discussion that was happening in the email thread that Luke started. And there were, there's at least 3 different variations that I can think of that people seem to have had in their heads when they, when we were talking about this. I think that that will make things a lot clearer for a number of these questions. I was looking at your thing on the end-to-end security, which may be a good topic for London. And the thing I was going to say was that the MOPS document on operational considerations for streaming streaming providers has a security section that talks about I'm encrypting at the application layer, I'm encrypting hop by hop, I'm encrypting end to end, and kind of what the considerations are there for each of those. That may be a reasonable template to use. I think you did say something that was starting to make me wonder. We have things that we want to make sure that we don't break existing business models unnecessarily. So for us to be thinking about that as we're meeting in London. And I wanted to ask if we had a GitHub with a GitHub wiki, is that something that we could set up quickly to start this catalog? Or is there a better way to do it? Because I think you're putting a lot of stuff in front of the working group that all of it matters. And for us to figure out how to do that in not a huge amount of time.
Thanks, Spencer. It's a valid points. I think having a GitHub wiki where, because most of the things I've listed down kind of is distilled down version of what's in Charter. Some might be my personal opinions, which is definitely open to change. Having this as a backlog or something would definitely help doing that. And I also agree with Alan. What Alan said is that yes, we have Charter says we have to do 15 things. What is the first 3 things you want to do, and kind of making that separation, saying this is the first 3 things we want to work on, and then rest would come eventually follow after that would be good model. And at the same time, even though we are trying to design a protocol that works both on the production and also on the consumption side, keeping these things in mind would help us not go back and redesign things that we have already designed and probably published an RFC out of it, right? So that's the only reason why this list was created. And I agree. We start with something small, and having this backlog somewhere would definitely help.
There's a lot of things that we don't have to design. We just need to make sure that we don't break them. Things that people are doing today.
So thanks, Spencer. And I hear the request to make sure we don't lose track of this list of things that we know we need to tackle. So I think Ted and I can make sure that we find a home to track this backlog. Does anybody else want to weigh in on what they think the 1 or 2 or 3 most important or the highest priority items to tackle first are, besides Spencer?
I'm still in queue because I don't. As in queue.
So I do still see you in the queue, Spencer, if you want to talk more or not.
I was, for the purposes of this conversation, I was trying to get out. I can always say something else. And if nobody's lined up behind me anyway, the working group is chartered to produce certain documents, whatever the right document is, and it may be the protocol document. You can create the repo for it now, and then we can be putting these in as issues and using labels on, this is for IETF 115, this is for, this is for later kinds of things to manage so we don't start out with 500 issues. But just to give us a place to get started and get organized. Do the right thing, of course.
No, if I may suggest, like since one of the first deliverable we have along with the use case document is the common media publication protocol, if we take that as the category that we want to kind of solve first, and some of these things will move out automatically from if we take that as a goal. Maybe when we create a wiki or somewhere, we basically go by that categorization, saying that we start with common media protocol, media publication protocol, and for that, these are some things we might want to see if we can address these technical questions for those things. That might be the first start.
Okay, I saw a comment from Luke in the chat about prioritization, but also referencing his upcoming slides. So I don't know if Luke, you want to jump in and echo that to the room, or if other folks have different opinions. Like I think what Suhas just said about, well, I think writing the common publication protocol is like one of the highest priorities. So we should take that and then work on subtopics from there first. Luke?
Sure. I'm just going to say, yeah, the most important part of a media transport or just a network transport in general is making sure the data gets there correctly. I mean, it's really tempting to start like nitpicking, like how do we support DRM, but at the same time, it's like, how do we make sure that media gets from point A to point B in a reliable fashion such that it can be decoded? And there's the few different drafts out there disagree a little bit on that. And that's why I wanted to kind of do a presentation of the common ground.
Okay, thanks. Is there anybody else who wants to? Oh, Mo?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Luke that packaging of the media, I think, is the most important thing to tackle first, because I think that quickly shows the differences that people are assuming. And it's critical for the transport of the media to understand the protocol boundaries of fragments and descriptions of them. It's useless to talk about things like congestion and other things if you don't have a basic understanding of what's the packaging of the individual protocol objects.
Okay, thanks. I think I'm getting a sense of where people want to go. Does anybody else want to weigh in, or should we move on to the next? Will.
Yeah, it's my mic off. Yeah, I just want to plus one on Luke, and I've been having a sidebar with him. A lot of the existing solutions just speak about client to server communication. The reality here is if we want to scale this, which I think is a core requirement, that it has to run through relays. So any sort of behavior that you can force for a hop at which you're an active participant, you're going to need to propagate that desired behavior across future hops where you are not one of the endpoints. And I just wanted that from the very beginning, we design a protocol that can be scaled over intermediaries and is not dependent upon client and server being on the same connection.
Thanks. Suhas?
I think I second with Will's the thinking there, and I'm going with like what Mo and Luke was saying, that how do we distribute this the publish the media from point A to point B through the relays, and that meets the requirements would be a good first set of tasks to do.
Okay, thanks. I'll leave it open for another couple seconds in case somebody else wants to add. I see some +1s in the chat for talking about protocol, talking about relays. Okay.
And just to say thank you to Suhas for doing the presentation. That was helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Suhas, very much. I think it's good to see those things. It's a little bit daunting to think about all the decisions we have to make, but I'm sure we'll get through them all. Okay. Go ahead, Ted.
I was just going to say, Ellen, I think our next topic is actually polling to see who's going to be presenting drafts between now and London. Obviously, the draft deadline is Monday, so if you haven't got your fingers to the keyboard, get them on now. I know we're expecting something from Spencer and James. I believe we're expecting something from Luke. Are we expecting any others is the next big question.
I still see Suhas in the queue, but I'm guessing that you're done. Yeah, okay. Hung?
Yeah, I just submit a draft. Its name is Design Choice, Design Space Analysis of the MOQ. I know the Renee is kind of the first class citizen of the MOQ, but there are a lot of things about the Renee is not very clear. For example, how to organize the Renee, how to choose the stream from producer to consumer, which Renee they go through. If it's like the CDN, it's like a tree topology, but we have other choice. For example, we can do some kind of overlay routing between the Renees, and there are other things such as that the media is end-to-end encrypted, and the Renee cannot access the media, or Renee can decode, can decrypt the query connection. I think this draft is just analysis. So I would like to discuss with people. Yeah.
Okay, so please send us the name of the draft, and the chairs will take a look at it and try and fit that into the agenda. Maxime?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, my co-author and I are thinking to present an approach of estimating some metrics of live streaming, like jitter, latency, some packet loss, and related metrics. So as usual, we do it almost the last day, so today or tomorrow we are thinking to publish it. But we would like also to request some time to share the view and hear what the group thinks on it.
So Maxime, I think that's background information at a sufficiently deep level that it's probably best if you send that to the working group mailing list. We're going to have a pretty tight agenda in London, and it sounds like that sort of jitter, having not read the draft, of course, might be of more generic interest than specific to the design space from MOQ. So if you could send it to the mailing list now, we can take a look at it as a group and go from there. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like we have Luke and Xavier in the queue. Luke, you're going to be the next presenter. Can I take Xavier first?
Of course, yeah.
Xavier? Or possibly Javier?
Right. No, that's yeah. That's Gary tried. Thank you. So yes, we plan to propose to publish a draft, maybe today. That's on the type of relay that you would have at the ingress point of 5G networks and other wireless networks, and that would need to deal with the congestion and energy saving techniques. So they would need certain type of metadata. So I think this can contribute to the discussion, like maybe in terms of use case, to know if this type of use case would be suitable, and also potentially, in terms of metadata and what type of metadata and where this metadata would be needed in the flow.
Okay, when you have submitted the draft, please send a note to the chairs and we'll take a look at it and figure out how it fits in. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. And the next person in queue is actually our next presenter. So I'm going to go ahead and share your slides. Here you go.
Thank you. So I know this interim's not meant to be too technical, so this is, not going to be too much of a discussion. This is going to really be covering a little bit of the background of the previous drafts, even before the working group was formed, and just a little bit of progress on how we're trying to combine them. Go for it. So the number one goal, I think, and this really relates to the last slides that Suhas had. I think the first thing we need to tackle is how do we drop media during congestion in respect to the encoding. You just can't drop arbitrary packets with media. It's going to cause decode errors. But there's a lot of different techniques you could possibly do to effectively reduce the bitrate very rapidly during congestion. And I wanted to go over how various different protocols do that. Next slide. So the first thing we need to really cover, and this is one thing that it would be nice to have in maybe even a requirements draft. I don't know. This is like a background of media. Is how is media even encoded? What are we dealing with here? What are we trying to put over the network? So at the top, I have a very simple. This is what WebRTC typically does, or like really simple encoders, where you have an iframe, effectively a static image, and then p frames will reference. They're delta encoded of a previous frame. If you look back to just the previous one, that's the lowest latency, really. It's also the simplest. It's just you can get more complicated. You can start introducing what are called B frames, which can reference previous or future frames, and any number of them as well, which is equally problematic. All of hardware encoders will have a fixed structure, where this is just one example, whether it's IBPBP. Even though these B frames, like frame number 2 is a B frame, it actually depends on the third one. So the transport needs to be aware that frames, do reference out of order. And then finally, we have even what we see is with software encodes is if you really want the highest compression ratio, you pretty much just have this spaghetti of references everywhere. You still have an iframe, but it's up to the encoder what references are made where. This is very codec specific, but you can create this tangled mess of dependencies that need to somehow be respected over the network. Next slide. So one way of doing this, and this is what Meta has been doing for a while now, is to use a quick stream per frame. And the idea is there's kind of this implicit dependency that this stream depends on this stream, so you should deliver them in order during congestion. And if a stream is taking too long and it's not high priority, you can send a reset stream frame to effectively drop it during congestion. This is kind of similar to how WebRTC works, actually, and RTP in general is you kind of package at a frame level, but there's no explicit information on the wire about these dependencies. That's why there's dotted arrows everywhere. Next slide. So what I've done is at Twitch, I've been working on Warp. The idea is we use quick streams to just deliver what's called group of pictures in order. So we don't care what the whole mess of frame dependencies are. We just deliver them in an order that the decoder can handle just fine. There's an idea of prioritization such that newer content will arrive before older content, and that's how you can effectively starve and drop during congestion. So Rush was a previous draft out there. Warp is another draft that's being published. Next slide. And the third notable draft that we're trying to combine is QuickR. It's a concept of, it's far more complicated than this, by the way. It's effectively a pub/sub network with the important distinction that there's a header at the front of each stream that informs a relay on how that stream should be delivered, such as identification, prioritization, timestamp, any information required for a larger fan-out decision. Under the hood, it uses Rush or Warp. There is a section about datagrams as well, but just to simplify, it uses one of the two under the hood. Next slide. So my goal has been to try and combine the parts of the draft that all agree with each other, to try and find a single approach that can do either style, at least either Rush or Warp style of delivery. And I'll have this ready by Monday. I'll at least have a draft published. But just a little teaser, the idea is that you can have a stream for any number of frames is effectively the compromise. So you can do Rush where you can have a stream per frame, and you can do Warp when you can have multiple frames per stream. And then there's a middle ground where you can just pick and choose whatever frames are on the stream. The important caveat, though, is that there is a header within each stream that says that this stream depends on this stream, or like some information for both relays and also to know what stream should be delivered in what order to best respond to congestion. Next slide. So yeah, like I said, London draft. I'd love to talk more about the technical details. I don't have the time either to talk too much of this interim. And the big thing I really want to plant in people's head is kind of alluding to what I think I saw in chat just earlier, is how will CDN support this in general? I think that's an ongoing, that's just something I just want people to start thinking about it. Do you want a pub/sub model, or is there some way we can map these streams to a traditional pull-based CDN? So, yeah. That's not, yeah, I think that's probably one of the next bigger things to identify is if we're trying to combine all the use cases in one protocol. Next slide. And yeah, a lot of people have helped with this draft. Quite a few names up here, but the main authors, I would say, Luke for Warp, Suhas for QuickR, and Kirill for Rush. But there's been a collaborative effort amongst a lot of people. So thank you. That's all I got.
Thank you very much. And just for the folks here, I think we are counting this as a preview of London rather than opening this for discussion today. We only have like 6 minutes left, so definitely not enough time to dive into the details there. Xavier, it looks like you're in queue. Is it to dive into the details? Because if so, I'm going to ask you to hold your water until the draft's out and then take it to the list.
Oh, sorry, my mistake.
Spencer? Also.
I was just going to say how gratified I was that you all were able to find common ground to put in a draft. That's already encouraging.
that is very encouraging, and we really appreciate the work on that. I will encourage you, as you put the draft together, to think about what folks you need to reach out to, whether they be other folks who do similar things like the YouTube crew or the CDN folks or any of our video codec posse here at the IETF, because we may want to get early review from quite a variety of people if this is going to be kind of the basis of ongoing work here. I have seen in the past a couple of situations where we didn't do that early review quite broadly enough and ran into later problems. So after the draft is out, expect it to be passed from hand to hand pretty rapidly.
Yeah, I will mention that I just replied to my thread on the mailing list with a link to the current draft full of to-dos and the GitHub, if anybody would like to take a look and leave feedback.
Okay, that would definitely be great. So I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. I want to thank the note takers, especially. I really appreciate it for the work they put in to grab some notes for us. Is there anything else we need to cover today before we adjourn and start getting everybody ready for their final run at drafts for London? Alan, any final thoughts?
No, just thanks everyone for coming and participating, and I'm looking forward to seeing everybody in a couple of weeks.
Okay, thanks again, and we will see you on the mailing list.
You all for a very productive meeting.